And does it say that it's recording? Can you see it?
It does.
Yes, it does.
Okay, cool. All right, great. I'm going to start letting people in then too. Hello.
Welcome, everybody. Come on in, come on in. Let me just... Cool. All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. Happy Monday. No problem, Cher. Feel free to just listen if you can't, speak, totally fine. We'll definitely have a section for questions. So feel free to chat those in, and as you can, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as you come in. You can, would love to know your name, where you're coming from, what location you're on right now. My name is Emilio Tavares. I'm the Policy Director for Hunger Free America, and I'll be your moderator for today. But I'm gonna just give folks one more minute before we officially start. Okay, yeah. So we wanted to, as I was saying, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to do so with your names, pronouns, where you're coming from, your favorite food. We want to do, great. Grantham, North, New Hampshire, I see.
Neighbor.
Lots of people. We're at 32. So we're just going to give a couple of more folks time. We have folks from Frisco, Texas as well. Keep them coming. Massachusetts, Dedham. Gotta visit these places someday. I was saying, my name is Emilio. I'm the Director of Advocacy, Policy, and Research for Hunger Free America, and I'm coming to you from New York City. We're a national organization, but we have more of a presence in some areas than others. Welcome from Brooklyn. New Mexico, Washington State, all over. Good stuff. Okay, I think we should get started because I don't want to hold people up. So one more time, my name is Emilio Tavares. I'm the Policy Director for Hunger Free America. And so if you're just joining us, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your pronouns, what city you're from, and your favorite food. I'm speaking from the physical space of New York City, but I would like to acknowledge the land on which I currently reside, which historically was that of the Lenape, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Wappinger indigenous peoples. We deliver a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land, which was taken by conquest along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land and the imposition of white supremacy. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights as a small step toward equitable relationship and reparation. We encourage the participant on today's call to privately acknowledge the land that sustains and supports you. If you do not already know your area's history, we have provided a link in the chat to learn more about the indigenous people that live or lived in your area. If you are new to Hunger Free America, HFA is a nonpartisan national nonprofit building the movement to enact the policies and programs needed to end domestic hunger and ensure that all Americans have sufficient access to nutritious food. We do this through both our direct service and advocacy work, both of which we feel strengthen each other. As the Director of Policy and Research, my work centers around the public policy and talking to legislators, administrators, and decision makers on how these programs get implemented. HFA's work to end hunger is more pressing than ever, given the pandemic and just the times we live in. According to a report published by us earlier last year now, July of 2020, The United States is facing the gravest hunger crisis in modern times, with more than 1 in 3 children missing meals or suffering from reduced portion sizes because their families don't have enough money for food. The rate of child hunger is 5 times higher than before the pandemic, and adult hunger is 2.5 times higher. As domestic hunger increases, all types of low-income families are suffering, but data shows that people of color are impacted at higher rates. HFA data shows that in the spring and summer of this year, 41.1% of Black respondent households experienced food insecurity, as did 36.9% of Hispanic responding households, in contrast to 23.2% of white respondent households. As the global pandemic and demands for racial justice collide, it is more important than ever to uplift MLK's message of justice. For over 2 decades, Hunger Free America has honored Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy by coordinating service events and volunteer actions supporting long-term solutions to hunger. With this year's Serve-a-Thon, our hope is that our volunteers will learn something new, take action in the fight against hunger, as well as take away some ideas on how to continue working towards and supporting a more equitable community. As we begin the workshop, I'd like to introduce some group norms to frame our dialogue. A safe space is a brave space. So we are welcome to create a brave space where we accept the likelihood that we will be uncomfortable when investigating issues of race, privilege, and oppression, and our roles within them. Work to recognize your privilege. Use this space to recognize and investigate your privileges, for example, class, gender, sexual orientation, and ability, and honor the differences we all experience and bring to this space. Take risks, lean into discomfort. We are all in process, so challenge yourself to contribute even if it is not perfectly thought out. Actively listen. Use your energy to listen to what is said before thinking about how to respond. Notice when defensiveness and denial arise. If anyone has any additional norms you'd like to add, we welcome them in the chat and we'll add them to future workshops. And so for today's workshop, it's titled Food Justice as Housing Justice. So we will be discussing the intersections of access to housing and access to food assistance. So to speak on these topics, I'd like to introduce our co-host for today. Michael Redman is the Executive Director of Upper Valley Haven, and Amber Johnson is the Director of Volunteer Services and Community Education. They're located in White River Junction, Vermont. So Jennifer, could you give us a bit of an overview of your work?
Yeah, so it's this
absolutely.
is Michael speaking, because Jennifer, who's my Director of Operations, who heads our food assistance program and is long involved with Hunger Action Vermont and other local food movement, took ill today, and so I'm filling in for her. And I also have to apologize. I have to have a board of directors meeting at 5:30, so I'll jump off in just a little bit. But for an introduction, the Upper Valley Haven is a nonprofit organization that's been located here in White River Junction for 40 years. This is our 40th anniversary year. You may not know where White River Junction is, but it's near Hanover, which is where Dartmouth is located. So it's right on the river between Vermont and New Hampshire, sort of mid-state. It's in this area around us. There's some small cities that are built up, Lebanon, big health center. As mentioned, Hanover, where Dartmouth is located, White River Junction, which is the town of Hartford, and Norwich above us. It's interesting that if you go outside of these areas, even inside these areas, there is a lot of poverty, but it's different from the urban poverty that you might be more familiar with. It's more rural poverty in small town, non-metropolitan area. And if you get outside these areas, not too far at all, the rate of poverty increases quite dramatically. The areas have been very much affected by the hollowing out of the middle class economy, by the prior pandemic of the scourge of opioids that spread across the land, supported by the capitalist environment. And now with the health pandemic of COVID-19, we're also seeing impacts there. So the Havens work in a couple of areas. In food, we're the second largest food shelf in the state of Vermont. We serve over 13,000 people a year, about 4,000 households, and move tons and tons of food through our small program. We also are active in shelter and affordable housing. We operate 3 shelters for people who are without shelter, an adult, a family, and then during the winter season. We then serve people in supportive housing work as well, so that when people who do obtain housing are able to sustain it. About 50 employees. Our budget's about $3.5 million plus the food that's donated. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thank you, Michael. Amber, do you want to add anything?
No, that covered it well.
I would add that in addition to our employees, the volunteers, which Amber will talk about, are part of our work. An essential part that we have over 400 volunteers that each year. And so it shows a community coming together to address these twin challenges of homelessness, sustainable housing, and hunger and sustainable food.
Sure. So, today is MLK Day. So what does the Martin Luther King Jr.'s work and legacy mean to you and your work?
Yeah, maybe I'll start that, Amber, if it's okay, because I always, you can't go wrong by turning to the words of Martin Luther King Jr. for inspiration and caution and action. So there's 2 speeches that I often will go to for parts of our work around in this area. When he said, "History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals that pursued a self-defeating path of hate. We are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. Procrastination is the thief of time." In another speech, he said, "Poverty is a monstrous octopus which tentacles spread throughout the country." And here's where it really moves to us in our work. He said, "Nothing is new about poverty. We have the resources, we have the skills, we have the techniques to get rid of poverty." And that's the space that we work in and try to remind ourselves of that it is solvable, and that organizations like yours are the ones that help bring about the actions that move large numbers of people across the country to do that work. We in our own little way here carry that out, not only by our service, but also then by our advocacy in our states of Vermont and New Hampshire to try to create more opportunities for food for families, for children in schools, which is one of our primary local agenda items for advocacy is universal food, universal meals in all schools. It's easy to remember, and that's what we're far from that. And then also around housing, that there, as we'll talk later, the links between having a place to live that's stable and being free from hunger.
Well, yeah. How do you see those 2 issues connected? One's access to housing and one's access to food. Yeah.
Amber, do you want to swing at that, or you want me to keep going on?
You're doing so great. And plus, I recognize we only have you for about 15 more minutes.
Okay, so for us, it's a place to, if you're without housing, you're in survival mode all of the time. And we know that because we work with the people who are camping out or sleeping in their cars, and it's just, it's a moment-to-moment existence of the day. You cannot, your whole worldview is shaped by getting from one day to tomorrow. If you have a place to live, your time horizons spread, and among other things of justice and health, and it's connected. We talk about social determinants of health in the healthcare world now, and you can also say that health is a social determinant of housing as well. And so our work to help people become housed is one that we know that then leads to more stability. But we also know that food can be an entree for us to focus on other issues too. Because of, I mentioned our food shelf, which is quite large, open 6 days a week now. Because of our model of service, it's changed a bit during the pandemic where we have to do more remote work. But traditionally, when we're inside, it's everyone's a customer, everyone is treated with dignity, and we also match people with volunteers as they come through, been well trained on how to be a welcoming body. And it's always then the conversations that might lead people to reveal more about what their immediate needs are about food, why they're here today, but they may not be even familiar with all the other things that they even can do to focus on housing. And so we see that as part of the links. One of the other is that when I mentioned that we're in a rural and semi or non-metropolitan area, and so transportation becomes a barrier to people for both employment, but also even food and getting here. So in urban areas, sometimes it's talked about food deserts where a lot of people congregating, no place, for where there's food. Here it's a distance. It might be, similar, I guess, if you think about it in large urban areas as well, that people have transportation challenges, and we try to address that through systems of letting people know that a friend or a neighbor can be helpful to you, to come here to pick up food for you at order. We take, we're like a shopping station. We take orders of what people want. We focus on healthy. We focus on high quality. We focus on volumes of food, and so those are some ways that housing, both in its whether you have it or you don't, or if you do, where how far you are located from where services are present, how we try to work with that all the time.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize what you said, that because I've heard, there's like the housing first model, or like they say like, oh, let's fix one thing or the other. And I think really what you're saying is having the security of a place to plan from allows people to really access everything else that might need.
That's right.
Amber, did you want to add anything?
And I think also, sure. I was going to say, I think that oftentimes we know that urban areas that housing costs are astronomical and unaffordable, but it's also true in our rural area. And it's especially where we live, because of being very close to Dartmouth College, being close to a large hospital, being close to a couple businesses that can afford to pay higher wages, our cost of housing is really large. And so even in our area, it's going to be over $1,000 easily for maybe a 2-bedroom, probably not close to a bus line. And so a huge impact for us. So what we see is a number of people who are working, who still are unable, feeling food insecure and unable to feed their families. So yeah, but I think that that's really important, because we often really work on the cost of housing as well, and access to housing. We live in an area with a very low
Vacancy rate,
rate. And so there's just not enough housing to go around.
So vacancy rates, you're referring to maybe like business spaces that are like available, but when it comes to like apartments and things like that, not so much?
Yeah, the vacancy rate's well under 1%. And as Amber said, it's a somewhat thriving economy for some people of higher skills, and which only drives up the price of housing, including rentals. We even find that through HUD, we have access to vouchers, through multiple voucher programs to help people with rent subsidies, either permanent or even temporary for 1 or 2 years. And but HUD sets maximum rents allowed that you can use on an apartment, and we sometimes will have a subsidy, so we could bring someone's rent down to 30% of their income, and we can't find a unit that's available where the landlord now has choice. The landlord may say, well, the people that are living in poverty, they sound risky, that bad tenant. I'm not going to participate in the program. I don't have to. People are people are willing to pay market rent, or that the rents have just gone up so high. Even the landlords who are willing that the rents are above what HUD allows the voucher program to have access. So that's the challenges of being in this small economy, which has wealth attached to, but not far from rural poverty and non-metropolitan poverty. And so, not unlike any area, but we see that up close. It's been very frustrating for us in our housing programs to help people move out of shelter. We have a lot of people now in motels that the state put up during the pandemic, which is great for health. We've not one person who's homeless in Vermont has died or even been hospitalized with COVID. So it's a testament to a strategy, something you can solve. People don't have housing, give them a house. Give them even a motel room for a while. It will keep people safe. Not long term, but it is a short term strategy. And just as we saw during the summer, when the unemployment insurance supplement of $600 a week, that poverty rates actually went down. Well, how about that? You give people more money, you can solve some poverty. So it's encouraging to see that the incoming Biden administration has having in its early plans is having a focus on child poverty, with some estimates being that 50% decrease in childhood poverty, which is certainly something that we will see the impact of that as well.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on the idea that hunger, poverty, homelessness, they're all like intersectional issues, and we can't really tackle one without tackling the other. So how does your organization engage in this kind of like intersectional justice work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a great day to ask that too. We recognize, we're the good guys, right? We're the ones who are, fighting the good fight, but we recognize too that that is only a part of the story, that the intersectional justice of racism and sexism and gender discrimination and so many others, that we are part of that too. And what we've been trying to do, particularly over the last year, is to be more conscious of that, so that we say that everyone is welcome here. And we believe that, but we wonder, and we're challenging ourselves to say, how do we know that? Are we welcoming? How do other people perceive us as they come to, they see this as a place of safety and a place that where they will feel comfortable. And if they are somehow different, then you think of your traditional Vermont person but it's not, even though Vermont and New Hampshire are by large some of the most whitest states in the country, and the oldest as well, there are still large numbers of BIPOC populations here. And so we've ourselves formed an employee committee on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and are pursuing an agenda that is trying to be more aware of those intersectionalities. And we think we've made some good strides towards that, but we're by far not finished.
I mean, I think I'm hearing you say, asking feedback from the community, like, how do you, we think we're doing great, but what do you think?
Yeah, Amber, maybe you could talk about that some too. Yeah.
Please go. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's one thing that has kept me at the Haven for 7 years now, which is that I think that sort of input from the community, but also sort of having the community actively engaged in our services. And so I run our volunteer programs, and as Michael said, we have about 450 active volunteers before COVID, and even with COVID, we still have about 200 active volunteers during this time. And our volunteers come from all walks of life. So we really target having individuals who have lived in our shelters or used our services, because I think that a number of people want to, it's a really nice way. People come and say, I want to give back, which is awesome. It's not why we do it, but it's great to have their engagement, but also to have their voice and to have their thoughts on what our services are. It's really important to us. So not only engaging in our services, but we do a series of surveys, and we're going to start doing focus groups as well to really look at how does it work with us. I think the other thing that I love about the Haven is that we really work with other organizations in our area. And so recognizing that we are not, that we are all in this together. And so not only the other NGOs, which I think people sort of say, okay, well, I'm working with all these other ones, but also working with businesses and talking about what wages do they pay and what's affordable, working with the hospital, working with the educational institutions in our area. So really thinking about what makes our community run and how can we all have these conversations together. And it's been wonderful to see that piece of our work.
And Emilio, I need to jump off here to go run my board meeting, but it really is a great opportunity. Thank you for including the Haven in this, and Amber, wish you well, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
We'll be in touch. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Michael.
But to keep the conversation going, Amber, I wanted to highlight something you said, which is, that some of your volunteers are, I guess you call them customers, like former, like recipients of your services, former shelter residents and stuff. And I love that, because I think something I like to highlight, especially during the pandemic, is that not only is it good to give and to like involve people in the process, but there's also opportunities. Like I think the social services field is needed now more than ever. So giving people the skills to get jobs in this field is also like a leg up in a way.
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
think too, we're trying to be, I was thinking, so one of the things we're really looking at is being intentional about creating those opportunities. Because I think it's easy, for sort of thinking about what barriers do we have in place, when do our opportunities take place, what kind of transportation is needed, are there any cost barriers that might prohibit somebody from volunteering with us. And then one of our new programs is where we've always worked with Dartmouth College, which is in the area, which is awesome. And it's really great to see students with us, but also looking at some of the other organizations and students that might have sort of a higher population that are the first ones in their families to go to college, and how can we tailor those internships and educational opportunities, and thinking about that. So it's been nice to sort of know that it's there, and also try to think about how we can be intentional about creating that.
As a former college student that got college credit for that kind of work, I think that's really helpful, especially with college hunger on the rise as well. So I guess in that vein too, we know there's like disparities in age and income and things like that, but also through our Serve-a-Thon, we try to continue the MLK's vision of social and racial justice. So how do it sounds like you're figuring out the best way to do that, but what would you point to in terms of like today? And
that's a really good question, and I think it's a great question, and it's one I think that the Haven, along with hopefully the rest of the country, is really taking a real look at, and one that I would say that we're investigating, right, and trying to get better. And Michael mentioned the existence of our committees, and that's been good. I think the Haven's taken a real internal look and saying, how can we as an organization embody the principles that we externally say that we have, and that's really, really important. And so the committees have been a really nice way of doing it. They're all chaired and co-chaired by staff, and none of the directors or managers. We have participation in those, but as participants and not as leaders. It's been really important to us that they maintain that. Also, we really invest in education in our community, and so we have funds to help bring in educational opportunities. It's something that if you ever know of anyone wonderful to do presentations, we're definitely looking for it. But and so we're working with a number of other organizations to bring really important voices to our area, to have conversations and to open that up, which I think is another, and to intentionally put money towards that, which has been really, really good as well.
Well, that's an opening for me to plug in our Food Action Board program, which is our community organizing program. I'm new to managing the program, but I have a background in workforce development, and going back to what I said earlier about creating, those kind of like connections between like you're getting services and you're volunteering, but you could turn those skills into a career if you so choose. So I would love to do a presentation for you and anybody watching. Love that work. And so to that point, what could our participant, we'll be doing an activity today to support your work, but are there other activities? What are some other activities that we could do to support your work?
That's wonderful. And, I think that, gosh, I get a lot of students that ask this, and I'm always like, just be a really good person in the world. Like, I don't know. I think that honestly, I recognize that the Haven, we're small in comparison, right? We're in Whiteford Junction. We have one location. We do work with 15,000 people a year, sort of in general, but and that we have participants from all over the country. And so I think getting involved in your community is amazing, and seeing what's out there and what gaps might exist, and being a voice for advocacy is huge. And also just maybe seeing if there's a neighbor that needs a meal and cooking it for them. All of those pieces, I think, we really, in this area, have been lucky to have a strong community that came together during the time of COVID. And so our mutual aid groups are very active and very, very engaged. And so it's very easy when somebody calls and says, I'm homebound and I need food. We have 6 people who want to bring it to them and 3 people who want to pay for it, so that they don't have to. And that's been amazing. And I think that it's really highlighted to me the power of community.
So just to highlight some of the opportunities I heard in there, so you use volunteers to help pay for some of the food, deliver the food. Are there other opportunities other ways that people can get involved?
Totally. And just to be clear, the Haven volunteers don't pay for any of it.
Okay,
mostly it would be within our mutual aid, which are community to community
programs.
So they match Yeah, so our mutual aid organizations have been very, very active in this area, which is wonderful. The Haven gives you free food, so anybody can access free food, which is wonderful also.
Sorry.
But I would say, yeah, sort of engaged and being aware. But if you do live in this area and you want to volunteer at the Haven, we have a million opportunities and we need individuals. So for when we used to have about 170 active volunteers in our food shelf, and after mid-March, we went down to 10. So it was a massive drop. And some of it were individuals who are high risk. And so we were encouraging them to stay home. We didn't know what it was going to look like in this area. But we have been amazing and built back up. We also then onboarded about 100 new people within the next 6 weeks who are willing to come forward and volunteer with us. But we are still working on building our volunteer force back up. And we still, we have a lot of safety in practice, and we've instantly did safety measures. So we've been really lucky. But
Yeah,
do
absolutely.
come volunteer with the Haven if you're in the area.
Yeah, and I'll drop your website in the chat so folks can take a look. I'm sure donations are also helpful to continue the work that you're doing. So if anybody feels free to donate. But now I'll open the floor up for
Please
questions. Yeah. I'll open the floor for questions. If anybody wants to chat their questions or unmute themselves, I can also check the raise your hand function if you just like